bridges for a successful economic recovery, we have indeed seen your efforts in building strong bridges through the recent hosting of the Guyanese and Kenyan presidents during the Global UNCTAD 15 conference hosted from October 3rd to 7th. These alliances fostered will no doubt support our economic growth and sustainability in the medium to long-term future. We also want to applaud you for the recent adjustments to the protocols for entry into our island and look forward with great expectations as we go into the winter tourist season with increased airlift and hence an increase in visitor arrivals. We do expect further relaxation of some additional protocols to give each visitor to our island the opportunity to fully experience the Bajan way of life. We do appreciate the delicate balance, however, that must be maintained between getting our economy going while continuing to safeguard the most vulnerable in our society. But we have to find ways to live and thrive with COVID-19 still being around us. So as we build bridges, the construction must be precise, thorough, consistent, and collaborative. We are, however, quite concerned at the slow progress in moving and improving our ease of doing business at the commercial level, with the only significant improvement to date being the implementation of the Asikuda World. And even then, with the implementation of that program, other government agencies are stalling the full benefit of Asikuda World due to their inefficient and bureaucratic processes. Aligned with the issue of ease of doing business is the slow pace of the digital transformation strategy. COVID-19 has clearly highlighted the urgent need for digital payments and services with government. Systemic inefficiencies across some government departments often retard the flow of business activities and frustrate new business developments. We cannot be distracted as we build. The extremely slow pace of the approval process for the implementation of photovoltaic projects is also quite concerning. We have set aggressive targets in the alternative energy sector, but the bureaucracy is stifling the efforts of the private sector to support you in achieving the set objectives. There is a clear need to establish a unit to expedite and facilitate approvals for entities involved in the non-hospitality sectors, where the investment will allow for transfer of technology and knowledge, good-paying jobs, skills, specialized skills, and it increases employment. And more than anything else, it is export-driven and foreign exchange generating. As we build, we must tackle the challenges ahead as we continue building. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all areas of business, and some have even had to deal with loss of employees. But if there is one common element among the business community, is that we all had to adjust the way we do business. As a result of cost and productivity challenges due to positive cases in the workplace, there are many businesses who continue to struggle with cash flow issues. To this end, we need your support in asking commercial banks to consider restructuring of loans to take into account the reduced cash flows, and further, that your government legislate a Fair Possession Act that protects the mortgagor's equity. The duty-free sector has also been severely impacted by the lack of tourists on island, and our appeals to date have not seen any attempt to render relief. So I use this occasion to again make the appeal regarding the implementation of local duty-free sales, which can stimulate some critical business activity for that sector this Christmas season. When we build, we must build with resilience in mind. Prime Minister, we have heard your clarion call to action regarding the issue of global warming and the fact that we will not make it without support from the developed world. We recognize, as you have said, that it is going to be challenging for the global community to reach the limit for climate change of 1.5 degrees. As you head to Glasgow, Scotland shortly, for the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, we anxiously await the outcome of that conference, as small developing states like Barbados will face significant social and economic fallout without the timely, necessary resilience building and adaptation strategies being put in place. We must build economically. Rising consumer prices have been a major concern for all Barbadians. And in some instances, business were accused of being the source of the price increases. By now, however, the majority of Barbadians should know of the challenges in the global supply chain, shipping challenges, and commodity shortages that have all contributed to higher prices of consumer items. The BCCI is aware of the work done to consider a prices and incomes protocol, and we are therefore anxious for this to be concluded. The BCCI does not support price controls, but we fully support an approach where all parties involved in the importation process contribute to the reduction of prices locally. To name a few: port charges, duties, markups at both retail and distribution, and banking fees. The BCCI commits its full support to work with your government as we strive to rebuild and grow our economy. As we build together, we can build stronger and more efficiently. With a firm foundation already in place, strong determination, resolute commitment, and God as our guide, we will achieve our shared objectives. We believe that with a collaborative and inclusive approach, together we can build bridges that will ensure a path to successful economic recovery for Barbados. Honorable Prime Minister, Ministers of Government, business executives, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, let's join hands as we build and show we love Barbados. Let's join hands and show how much we care. I thank you.
Anthony, thank you for setting the tone for today's forum and for those opening remarks. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, QC, MP, Prime Minister of Barbados. Prime Minister Motley is known locally and globally for her thought-provoking and well-delivered perspectives, and I'm sure today will be no different, as she delivers much food for thought ahead of our opening Q&A for both our in-person and online audience. Prime Minister Motley, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is almost strange to be back here, having not been here for 2 years, largely as a result of the intervening factors of COVID. But I welcome the chance to be here and to have a conversation with you again. In fact, when I was asked only less than 2 weeks ago, I suspect that I may have surprised the chamber with the alacrity of my response and the extent to which I was anxious to speak with you. And I hope that you know that in the world from which I come, prepositions mean a lot. And I'm not talking about to you, but with you. Mr. President, head of the Barbados Private Sector Association, Mrs. Tanis, and let me formally congratulate you for making history. Mr. Roach and other distinguished members of the private sector. Were it not for COVID, I would wonder whether this government should be in here at all because of how few people are in the room. I'd like to ask you to welcome my guest today, who is Lisa Wardell, who, as you know, is in fact the chairman of Adtalem, which is the parent company of Ross University and ACAMS, both of whom have worked extensively in Barbados and with the government of Barbados. Lisa, we thank you for joining us today. And we are even prouder of you because we know that you have Caribbean roots just to the south of us, and that has been, in our view, one of the reasons for your great success, even as you become one of the most successful black women in corporate America as you have become. Thank you for joining us. My friends, I had 2 speeches written for me, and I put both of them one side. And I did so because, as I said, I wanted to talk with you guys today. Because I don't need to repeat the challenges. You know them all. The pandemic, the climate crisis that we will go to talk about the future of our planet next week in Glasgow, the global supply chain, Anthony, of which you spoke. You only need to look at the front cover of The Economist magazine if you thought that we were talking foolishness for the last year. And that global supply chain started to become tattered with respect to medical supplies from as far back as 15 months ago. And what we are seeing is it just expand beyond rather than be improved. I don't have to talk to you about the fact that almost every country in this region is facing serious economic and financial difficulties. I don't need to remind you, but maybe I should, about why we perhaps are a little better than most, even at this juncture. But that when next door I have been addressing the people of this nation, that we need to learn to live with COVID, that we need to appreciate that we are dealing with a marathon and not a sprint, it is largely because we cannot continue to prey upon the past and hope that that will carry us forward into the future. We have no doubt that we all recall standing in that room upstairs. Some of the faces have changed, but the institutions remain the same. When, on the 1st of June, we announced to the country that we were going to walk boldly into the future and to take responsibility for our well-being, and that while it may have appeared to some unusual, by suspending the payments of our debt, we knew that fundamentally it was the sine qua non for us to be able to build the platform for economic growth in this country. Because we had had a situation where debt was literally sucking the oxygen out of this economy and out of everything we did as a society. 68 cents in every dollar going towards debt service. Fast forward, instead of 4 weeks of foreign reserve cover, we actually have today 41 weeks of foreign reserve cover, as you heard from the governor of the central bank yesterday, of import cover. Similarly, it would do us well to remember that a year, 18 months, 20 months before, at the beginning of COVID, our reserve cover was only at 26, 27 weeks. And many of you may say, but it's borrowed. Yes, it is borrowed. But what has been the cost of borrowing? We inherited a government where the then government could not borrow anything from anybody outside of Barbados from December 2013 to when they lost the benefit of being the government, the right to be the government, in May 2018. Since then, our interest rates for most of what we have borrowed are around 1%, but the most expensive not exceeding 4% with respect to what we have mobilized. There is no country across the world that has not had to borrow to get through COVID because of the absolute cessation of activity that has been involved. At the same time, we also cleared arrears. The government found over $1.9 billion in arrears, and we've cleared $1.878 billion in the arrears, with additional numbers then being discovered, regrettably, from an imperfect IT system at the Revenue Agency. And we therefore have managed to bring our arrears literally down, other than at the Revenue Agency, to less than $80 million between central government and the state-owned enterprises today as we speak. This is in spite of a debt crisis and a pandemic. We're conscious that much of that money was not necessarily going into only new investment, because many of you for whom that money was owed would have already yourselves owed others, and therefore all we were doing is stabilizing the relationships in the economy. But I dare say that many of you would not have been able to keep your head above water unless the government was in a position to put $1.878 billion into this economy in the last 3 years to stabilize you. There are some others who felt that we were being a little too ambitious and that we should have kept the money for a rainy day rather than putting it into your hands where it belonged. We clearly differed, and we've clearly been proven right in differing, because the government's financial situation has not been choked, while at the same time we've satisfied your needs, having gone through a period of time where you were literally waiting without knowledge as to when you would receive those funds. Within the context of the Revenue Authority, the reality is that of that $1.87 billion, we literally have given you back just under $800 million in tax refunds. I spoke to you 2 years ago and indicated that our goal was to have normalcy as far as possible. Well, I didn't know that normalcy would be challenged by COVID. But in terms of the conduct of our affairs and the conduct of our fiscal management, I'm happy to report that the government of Barbados is behaving as a government should and must, even in the midst of a pandemic and even in the midst of climate crisis. The reality is, however, is that all of those challenges mean that life has changed. Last Wednesday, in this very room, we met as a parliament and elected a president for the first time in our history, bringing to an end 396 years of British monarchical rule. And we indicated then that we must see December 1st as the springboard to the new Barbados. And why is it a new Barbados? Because it cannot be business as usual for none of us against the challenges that we face with the climate crisis, of course, being the most grave, but with the pandemic being the forerunner to what it is going to be like to live in a world that is deeply affected by climate. We've seen the problems of the global supply chain, the debt crisis, and what we hope will not happen, and it is up to us to avoid it, a financial crisis. We've seen the challenges that has placed on all of us. But what we have to come to grips with is what can we do to adapt and change. Regrettably, when we go to Glasgow, as I've said on many occasions, we're unlikely to see a world meet the 1.5 degrees to survive that we need in small island developing states. So we know that we have to adapt. And while it is predicted that we may see those temperatures come within the next 12 to 19 years, we are setting ourselves as a target the decade to adapt. January 1st, 2020, in talking to the country, we were trying to carry people there by saying that we had to become world class in all that we do in 7 years. Well, it is not only world class that we must become, but we have to adapt how we live and how we do business in this country. And what does that mean for most of us? You have spoken about areas of concern to you, but we need to understand context before we even get to the specific areas of concern, because the context is what is going to drive your behavior, and what is going to drive our behavior, and what is going to drive the behavior of ordinary Barbadians. Because a pandemic is fundamentally about behavior. Vaccine hesitancy is about behavior. Mixing with people is about behavior. Restrictions on movement is about behavior. And what we have first and foremost to accept as a nation and as a people is that we have the capacity to change our behavior and to change our expectations with respect to what we can do. We no longer live in a world where you can take for granted that what you want will be available when you want it, how you want it, if you want it. And that is why I've asked for a meeting with your members, and will ask the leadership of the workers' movement to be there on Friday as well. Not a formal social partnership meeting, but one that is dedicated to understanding how we are going to put ourselves ahead of the game with respect to food and nutritional security, given our excessive reliance on the importation of food for our people and for those who visit us. And why? The notion that you will always have a ship coming in every week with goods is not something upon which you can easily rely. The notion that we are small is something that we have all had to come to grips with over the last 20 months, in particular in COVID, in terms of those who can command access to medical devices or therapeutics or vaccines or containers or ships. I can go on and on. And the time has come for us to learn from the past, be buoyed by the character of those who went before us in the past, and to recognize now that hope is never a strategy, and that we must now employ the strategies to protect first and foremost the food and nutritional security of this nation. But it isn't only that. We also know firsthand that Barbados does not have enough people on this island. to buy the goods and services, to produce the goods and services that we need to maintain the quality of life that we have become accustomed to. And that there are difficult conversations that we must have that are not just, as you have heard me say over and over, about increasing our population size, and not only by the traditional means, as pleasurable as that may be for some, but the needs of the country become all the more precarious when you realize that in 13 years your labor force is intended to be smaller than it is now, and hence the implications for your social security system and your capacity to generate wealth in this country now become compromised by that bald reality. But it isn't only about increasing population. It is fundamentally about selling to the world what we also produce. And the goods and services that we have, how better can we do a job in producing and selling and encouraging others to use here as a domicile, as Ross University has done, as that location from which their business can be conducted. I want to challenge you in this room today, as members of the local private sector, to recognize that unless we accept that COVID recovery is all of our business, we are not going to make the journey as one. Thus far, the signs of recovery have been uneven. Tourism continues to be that part of the economy that has suffered most, and all who depend on tourism. And it is for that reason that we have determined from since last year that we needed to put in place a significant package with the BEST program in order to be able to ensure that hotels and tourism attractions, many of whom have already started to draw down, were in a position to be able to sustain their employees or have the opportunity for green transformation, digital transformation, and inclusive participation by looking for linkages with agriculture, manufacturing, and other suppliers locally as you seek to get through this difficult time. If ever there was a time to retool, refurbish, repurpose, it is now. And the Tourism BEST program was intended to be able to give us that opportunity, because as we start to open back up to the world, there has to be something different about what we are offering, because everybody else is bringing their A game to the table in order to encourage people to come and visit and work and participate. We captured the world's attention with a digital stamp, the welcome stamp. But it is now time to tweak that further in order to be able to recognize that the combination of factors that lie before us strategically with respect to a diminishing population and the need for greater long-stay tourism creates an opportunity for us to rethink the visitor and hospitality economy in fundamental ways. This world is not going to be the same after the pandemic. And that is why we keep making the point that COVID recovery is all of our business. But you hear me start first and foremost with the mind. And why? Because traditionally, our private sector has been protected. Protected before independence through colonial powers. Protected since independence by reason of many treaties and forms of legislation. But the one thing that we know now is that nobody owes us a living, and no one is going to give us anything, and that we need to earn our way through this world, and we need to rethink our purpose, and we need to rethink the urgency with which we act. Anyone who knows me well will tell you that my greatest frustration comes in the absence of urgency that too many of us unfortunately reflect. And it is largely because you cannot get through a crisis by being laid back and by waiting for somebody else to set the terms and conditions of how you operate. You cannot. And you cannot get through a cracking risk and without taking a chance. And that is going to mean walking on ground that you hitherto have never walked upon. It is going to mean doing things differently from your custom to doing it. It is going to mean working to see how best you can build those bridges and partnerships, recognizing, as I had cause to say with Lisa just now in the words of Eric Williams, that half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. How does a country have access to capital across the credit union movement and not find ways and instruments to purpose that capital to help us adapt to the new climate and to the new world within which we must function? And as I said this morning with the British High Commissioner, as we planted a tree on Arbor Day ahead of COP 26, that we have a responsibility to be able to do things differently. And what does adaptation mean? Because we talk up here, but I need to talk down there, so that every Barbadian understands what adaptation means and why is it that we're going to have to look for money to spend and to do things differently. Minister Simmons, your constituents who live on the coast are going to have to find ways to protect their properties. All of us who depend on the water from the aquifers that are coastal have to be concerned about saltwater intrusion. I don't need to talk to you about the flooding or the need for us to ensure that we can tie down as many roofs as possible, having come out of the first hurricane in 66 years. This year has truly been that year that has come to tell us that it cannot be business as usual and that we need to change how we do things and do so with alacrity. The first change must be mental, that we believe that we can develop and sell the goods and services not just locally but beyond our nation, because without exports, without engagement, and tourism is fundamentally an export sector. That's what tourism is. It's just that the export sector is onshore. But we are effectively exporting services to get people here. That was Butch Stewart's mantra all the time. But how else can we do it in manufacturing? How else can we do it in the services that we provide all through the Eastern Caribbean, but that we should now be looking for new markets in the Southern Caribbean, hence the meeting with the President of Guyana here in this room a few weeks ago, making clear the opportunities and possibilities for the export of capital. This country must not simply be regarding and recording, what we produce locally in GDP, but we must also be recording what we produce outside and start measuring gross national income. We must also start measuring more investment and capital formation. It is not part of the lexicon, regrettably, of either the public or private sector. But yet, we need it to survive. So that the first change must be mental. The second change must come with us understanding that we need to secure new markets. There's obviously an emotional connection to Africa, but we must build beyond the emotional connection and recognize the opportunities for what is one of the largest markets in the world, with whom we have a natural affinity and with whom they have a natural regard, affection, and affinity as well. That is why my government has been absolutely clear about what we must do to open up those trade and commercial opportunities beyond our traditional diplomacy. And we've chosen East Africa and West Africa as the locations to do it. And with God willing, eventually, we will have to look at North Africa, recognizing that Morocco is that bridge between Africa and the Middle East. What does it matter? When we meet Friday, if some of you are unable to command priority for placement of food or different things in order for us to secure a reasonable time frame for food security, you are going to have to look at non-traditional suppliers as well. And we now have the opportunity to do so. So it is simply a question of opening your eyes and beginning to understand that we need to change how we do business and sometimes with whom we do business. We need to also appreciate that we can no longer behave as if the Americas is an English-speaking domain, and that we can ignore the Costa Rican market and ignore the fact that we have trade agreements with them, or the Dominican Republic as a Caribbean nation with millions of people, or even Haiti, even as it is needed now more than ever for us to support them in their rebuilding and reconstruction efforts. Language cannot be an inhibitor to the growth of Barbadian enterprise. If only because technology now allows you to press translate. It's a fact. And then you go to Suriname, where the people speak 28 languages. And you begin to realize that we have done a disservice, Santia, to our children by not allowing them to imagine the world in multiple languages and not just in English. But that is not all. We can go no further. Mr. Branco, you talked about digitization. And the truth is that the government is on its way, but like you, I am equally anxious about the length of time that it takes. But equally, in whose hands are we now? The same private sector. The Ministry of International Business has a contract with BDO for a program called Bliss, and I'm waiting for the Bliss. We're told that by next year, early, it will be completed, which will allow for the automation of registration within the Ministry of International Business of entities there. With respect to KIPO, is it EY? In whose hands, Mr. Branco, we should be asking their dates of delivery? Because as I keep saying, I would love to twiggle my nose like Elizabeth. And it just happened like that. But we need to recognize that if we keep repeating these things, all we're going to do is to downpress people. But we need to appreciate that I hope that by next month, that we should be able to go live with basic company registration and incorporation and different things for basic functions within the corporate affairs registry in this country. Changing forever the laborious and bureaucratic way. Has it taken too long? Of course it has. But by the same token, have we been in a pandemic for more than half the life of this government? Yes, we have. And to that extent, therefore, we look forward to building upon that. But we also know that the other automated functions for corporate affairs should be completed within the first half of 2022. How many of you before had to hurt your head to get a certificate of character if you were going to apply for something official or apply for a job? You can now get it like that. How many of you could not pay at BRA before online? You now get it. My simple point is that this is a work in progress. I would have loved that I could twiggle the nose, but it is not that. What bothers me is the extent to which we are investing and the extent to which the country has to accept that we are going to have to also partner with others outside of this country in order to be able to get to the scale and to deal with the complexity of the issues, including cybersecurity, if we are to protect this nation as we go forward. It is against that backdrop that I've asked my special advisor, Jonathan Reed, to start to engage with the large entities globally to see how best Barbados can provide the data type of warehouse that will allow us to be able to have the kind of data analytics as well as the stability and integrity of architecture. Recognizing that ransomware attacks have become regrettably a little too common within this jurisdiction and among the corporate entities here, but globally. Similarly, we have to see the opportunity for our kids, many of whom are as adept in the digital environment as any other kid, any part of the world. And that is why, Minister of Education, I thank you and applaud you for being able to aggressively, even though we are in COVID, to undertake the robotics program, along also with our commitment to introduce it into the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps, who clearly have been affected as a result also of the limitations of COVID. This has been a difficult year for us in terms of education, but we are absolutely clear that Barbados' future depends on the extent to which we are committed to educating our people, because your business depends on the extent to which you can access a highly skilled labor force with the correct attitudes to productivity. It is not one or the other. It is absolutely essential, and we need to hold hands together in order to reach there. But it isn't only digitization or change of attitudes to markets, it's the question of access to affordable capital, even access to capital sometimes. And we have a serious conversation to have in this country. I have already spoken to the governor of the central bank, and I thank him for the initial efforts with respect to bank fees. But let us talk straight. Banks are intended to be in the business of financial intermediation, not security. If I wanted a watchman for my money, I would go and hire a security guard. But if we want money to work for the financial services sector and for development, then we need to appreciate that a loan-to-deposit ratio of 55%, when the developed world has ratios of 80%, tells me that we have people here who are watching people's money rather than working people's money. It cannot continue. And the notion that people can be paid fees or have to pay fees for minimum deposits, but poor people can't keep $2 in a bank now. Or rich people with large deposits now have to pay or are being asked to pay fees because you have a deposit that is over 10 million or 20 million. An act that will hurt, in particular, the credit union movement, whose deposits are lodged into the banking sector, or anyone, even lawyers with clients' accounts. AG. All of them. Somebody on Zoom won't talk. The bottom line is, my friends, that the next thing we're going to hear is that the bank is going to charge you a fee depending on how skinny you are or how fat you are, depending on how much pressure you put on the ATM or otherwise. It cannot be. And at the very time that we are asking you as a private sector, and we're asking Barbadians as individuals to think outside of the box, it cannot be that we are going to sit idly by and allow persons to abandon their purpose of financial intermediation and to go into the business of security. Now, I'm not meaning to be invidious. I'm not meaning to be offensive in any way. But I don't know how many more times to say it, and therefore I have advised the governor of the central bank that if we don't get it right, then the government will legislate, because it is not fair to the people or the businesses in this nation. Everyone else has taken a hit in this going down. And we've tried to be fair. But you cannot ask people to do that. Against that backdrop, like many, we have had to reflect on the fact that we needed to keep a bank of some type in this jurisdiction. The last 2 days, we were lucky enough to have the head of the Green Climate Fund in Barbados with us. We have started the discussions with them on the absolute necessity for a green bank in order to be able to finance much of what has to be undertaken in adaptation for you as members of the private sector, as well as for householders who have now to prepare themselves for a new reality in the 2030s, in the fourth decade of the 21st century. Like me, you can't twiddle your nose and get there either. So it means having to plan and having to secure the funding and having to be able to afford the funding as you go forward. I've asked Professor Avinash Prasad, who has stepped down as chairman of the Financial Services Commission, to undertake this vital task for the country to get the Green Bank going, whether singularly or in partnership with existing or new entities that are about to come. And I think some of you may be aware also of significant work that is being done towards the establishment of a digital bank locally as well. Without these opportunities to give our people access to finance, there is no oxygen. And that is why I maintain that the bank's appetite for risk has to change, because without access to oxygen, people will not be in a position either to expand existing businesses or to create new businesses in our country. But it doesn't end there, my friends. It doesn't end there at all. In addition to the funding, there must be the commitment to retool and refurbish. I spoke about it just now with the tourism sector, but you and I both know that it needs to happen in a number of other sectors across this economy, and that we continue to operate as if we're still in the 20th century with some of our offerings and some of our processes. And to change that requires a commitment not just to refurbish, repurpose, and retool, but also to retrain. This government has set up through the National Transformation Initiative the opportunity for Barbadians to be trained. And the numbers, quite frankly, are staggering in terms of what has been achieved already. And forgive me if I get them. Before COVID, I could remember these numbers on the top of my head. Now, I choose to go and get them. The National Transformation Initiative enrolled 22,495 Barbadians who, during the course of the last 2 years, have undertaken 58,877 courses on this little 166 square miles across a range of areas. We've also been very good in having over 12,428 Bajans take the citizenship course, which is the intention of this government once we settle, to have every Barbadian undergo that. It's a very short but limited citizenship course so that you know what matters to building and keeping this society and this country safe. In addition to that, a further 3,487 people took a course in coding with Java. Do you understand now why we have an obligation when we look at these numbers, or the fact that this country has paid for the education of 6,000 Barbadians in the areas of science in the last 5 years? We have an absolute obligation to be able to create the opportunities for employment, both from the government's point of view of facilitating and promoting, but more importantly, from your decision to invest. And that perhaps brings me to the next point, and I apologize up front to Mr. President and to the Executive Director before I go there. Because as I look around this room, there are too few owners of capital. And there are too few owners of capital, Mrs. Dennis, willing to participate in the private sector in formal ways. This country will only make it if everybody makes COVID recovery their business. And that means equally the owners of capital. I am unequally yoked, as will some of you who are here if you were meeting with people who could not make decisions about investments on their own. And whether we like it or not, and it is in no way intended to be deprecating to those of you who are managers of their capital, but this country must also recognize that it is time that the owners of capital turn up to the table to help turn this country around. It is not simply what government can do for you for your own particular business, but it is what we can do collectively to resolve the problems of this nation, which are multiple in nature and complex as well. And to that extent, therefore, the conversations about investments in making Barbados a knowledge and creative hub. That's the message we're sending when we establish Future Barbados and bring young kids under the ages of 30 to work together to solve some intractable problems for the nation. Tell us how we're going to reduce childhood obesity by 50%. Tell us how we can digitize the very same environment that you're talking about and bemoaning that from the public sector perspective it has taken too long. But who is talking to us about how much digitization has taken place in tourism or in manufacturing? Or to what extent can we improve the tools and the automated structures that we have in other areas of the private sector? These are the things that are going to make the difference to this country's survival. And I ask us, therefore, today to recognize that there must be a series of compacts similar to what we have put in place with the tourism framework, the BEST program. For some, it may not be the best, but for us, it is the best because it is the only one. Let's get real. And we all know that the pursuit of perfection very often is an obstacle to progress. None of us are divine, so mistakes will be made. But what we have, which others don't, is a determination that the government will make available its resources to be a bridge for you, the private sector, to keep your head above water during these difficult times. Without the BEST program, there would have been a number of bankruptcies in the tourism sector. Straight talk. Without the BEST program, there would be a number of bankruptcies in the ancillary tourism sector with the attractions. Straight talk. And we are now hoping to complete a number of compacts. One, with the public service vehicles and public transportation sector. And all a compact is that you need to see progress, but we need to see action too. And therefore, what is it that is going to bind us in the middle to be able to catalyze action? We accept, as we did already, in good faith and increased bus fares, but we accept now that there is a determination that we must also increase taxi fares that have not been increased for more than 12 years. But at the same time, there must be a mechanism for the independent determination as to what a fare is that is not based only on a few routes being placed on a card at the airport. Because if the Ministry of Public Works is ever to complete the process of breathalyzer testing, then you're going to need to be able for some people, Dr. Greenwich, to know how to get from Pike Corner to Applewitz at 2 o'clock in the morning when the curfews are off. Now, what is the fare for that? And we don't need the hardware that was needed in the past because we have the opportunity of software to be able to independently and transparently settle these matters. But a compact means that it can't just be about the increase in fares. It has to be about fairness. It has to be about safety. It has to be about all of these things. It has to be about transforming the sector into electronic vehicles and maybe even hydrogen in the future. The bottom line is that we have a need equally for a compact with the garment industry. We have been meeting with a number of persons in the last 2 weeks, and we're conscious that the extent to which this pandemic has so affected things has caused us, believe you me, to literally impair the cash flow of those who benefited from the school uniform market every year, and for whom that cash flow from that market was pivotal for the preparation for Christmas and other things. It is against that backdrop that once again the government will play a role of bridging, and we have agreed that we will buy 70% of the uniforms that are available in the country, and that once school resumes, I hope, Minister Bradshaw, by early in the new year, once we can get the vaccination numbers up, that we are then in a position to sell on those uniforms, and we will sell them at a 15% discount to parents, recognizing that they themselves have been equally challenged over the course of this year. But if you think we're going to do that without extracting a commitment from them to transform their industry, you got the wrong body here. And the compact, therefore, must be: how are you going to retool your industry, use computer-aided designs, work with the BIDC to create a cluster so that persons can micro-lease on equipment that they may not have the capital to buy themselves, partner with fashion designers. And I laugh because there are a number of females in this room who can all tell you, including one who I think, madam, you have the same shirt that I have. And once I saw you wear it, not the one today, that you have difficulty in wearing it to public events, which means you can't buy on rack. Which means that there is a room, a man can wear the same blue suit every day and nobody don't know the difference. Don't know the difference. But we have a unique opportunity in two respects. And I'm just using the garment industry as an example, the fashion industry as an example. Because we had previously a good garment industry, but once the World Trade Organization was formed, and once we had no longer the protections that existed before, we had not the scale to compete. The difference is now that the world is our oyster. And if we start to have the kinds of fashion designers and start to think how we can use West Indies Sea Island cotton, which still carries the greatest premium for any cotton globally, or even just determine that men in a new world where 1.5 degrees is not going to be there need to stop wearing the suits that they're wearing in this climate, and start to find a new form of business wear, then there is an opportunity for our fashion industry, our garment industry, to partner with fashion designers, to look at opportunities for export, recognizing that Barbados will never be able to compete on high volume and low value, but we can always compete on lower volume and higher value, recognizing that who is one of the world's icons in fashion? We forget where she come from? Westbury Road? And that has not inspired us to believe that we too can do it, and that you have all kinds of designers in this country, young and old, that can make a difference. But we need new equipment, and we need to use the technology where it is. So when I talk to you about compacts, that is what I mean. Friday, when we meet with the food producers and the food importers, we're going to talk about a compact then too. And Barbados cannot be the only location for farmers in Barbados to be producing. This government has worked too hard to settle the Brokopondo agreement with Suriname, and to bring the president of Guyana here, who reconfirmed to the private sector their commitment not only to making available land for production and farming, but also opportunities with respect to food security and us planning it out together. At the same time, there must be a life sciences park at the BIDC. And the government will shortly engage a firm to help us build out that sector, because that is where Barbados is going to make its name as a knowledge hub, relying on medical and educational services, as we know with Ross University, Lisa So, thankfully, and we continue and hope that we can see your growth and expansion with Ross and Chamberlain School of Nursing as we go forward in this country. And we thank you for wanting to deepen that commitment with Barbados even as we speak. We need to get up off of our seats and go and find work in BPOs, not the low-value BPO, but the BPOs that will add serious value, whether in graphic arts or software, medical transcription. Why do we have to wait for somebody to come in here with money to invest when you can go out there and get the business and do it here? That is why the owners of capital need to be at the table at this juncture in this country. And I've come therefore today to reinforce that it cannot be business as usual. COVID recovery is all of our business. The government will shortly bring to Parliament legislation for the establishment of a free zone, recognizing that we have to be able to find a way to exploit the geopolitical tensions, the opportunities for nearshoring, and the opportunities for a range of businesses that may not have existed before. Recognizing that the next 2 to 3 years will be difficult, even as we negotiate the transition within respect of the global minimum corporate tax, but conscious and confident that if we can marry it with substantive economic activity, if we can marry it with stabilizing this country with respect to the immigration issues that we have in terms of population deficit, then there may be a sweet spot that gives us a pathway to prosperity. But it starts with changing the mentality. And I end where I started, my friends. In this room, a week ago, we determined that we had the confidence as a nation, however challenging the global environment is, however complex it is, for us to be able to walk the road. The road is full of potholes, Mr. Chapman, there, the compliance unit there, and you're going to have to learn to live with them going forward, just as you're learning to live with the mask going forward. But the simple message, as the governor would also have said, is that unless we change our mentality here, first for vaccines, secondly, for believing that we can engage in business in different ways, thirdly, not just believing it, but actually getting up and doing it, not letting language constrain us, not letting geography constrain us, not letting history constrain us, and prepare for it deliberately, then, my friends, I believe that as difficult as the mission is, as complex as the journey is, as stifling as the environment is, then I believe that we will succeed and do well. This country has known what it is to face adversity before. Indeed, one may even say that we were forged in the bowels of adversity. I believe, my government believes, and enough Barbadians I know believe, that we have it within us to rise to the occasion. I ask the members of our private sector, let December 1st, equally for you, be that symbolic springboard where we change how we do business and where we change what we want to accomplish, where we start to recognize that it is not only what government can do for you, but it is what we can do as a collective, as a nation. Recognizing that the threats that we face from outside dwarf the differences that we may have domestically. And the only way we are going to make it is by banding together, changing our attitudes, setting a new mission, and remaining focused on achieving that mission. The sad news is that it is going to require persistence, and it is going to require determination, because it is not going to be a battle that is won overnight. It is not going to be a sprint. It will be a marathon. The sad news is, for some, is that even though we start the process, it is going to be others that will finish the journey for us. And it is others to whom we will pass that baton, because we have to stop thinking in terms of 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year horizons if we are going to make it out of this difficulty. In one sentence, what must we become? Self-sufficient, resilient, adventurous, curious, determined, remaining honest, remaining faithful, recognizing that at the end of the day, values determine action, and action determines progress. It is in our hands to decide what that progress will be by first and foremost settling the values and determining the action. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Prime Minister, for that very enlightening address, painting that vision of how we need to work together to overcome this, game changers, to be self-sufficient, resilient, adventurous, curious, really to expand our minds, and thanks for painting that vision. So we are now coming to our open Q&A segment, and this is an opportunity for each of you to pose questions to the Prime Minister. I also want to remind, we will try to take questions from those of you in the room as well as those joining online. I'd like to invite Anthony to come up on the podium with us as well. And then I would also like to ask the technical team to showcase some of the online participants. At our event, at our last count, we had about 65 people online also participating in the event. So I'm going to just start the ball rolling in terms of the questions, and then hopefully I'll invite others to participate as well, both online as well as in the room. So I guess my first question, Prime Minister, is related to reopening the economy and tourism in particular. I mean, obviously we're going through a very uncertain period. And while it's encouraging to see that bookings are in fact increasing and the winter season is looking somewhat promising for some establishment, high-end real estate, from what we understand, the sales are pretty strong. Construction is rebounding, but equally,
recording in progress.
COVID cases are also rising exponentially, and the rate of vaccination take-up is stagnating. So as we rapidly approach winter, there are growing concerns, about deferrals or cancellations if we cannot, in a timely period, create a safe destination and workplace for visitors or employees and the population at large. I mean, the guidance from the WHO clearly indicates that vaccinations significantly reduce the risk of contracting the disease, as well as the severity and length of it. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, the government displayed and has and continues to display strong leadership with respect to using the tools available to it, you know, to balance the needs of the population, but also restrict movement, quarantine people, and mandate specific actions. You know, this need to, or this requirement to vaccinate against other diseases is not new. So the question really is, why not use the tools available to mandate vaccination?
That's a lot of long talk to ask me why I don't mandate vaccination. But perhaps if you, like me, understood the nature of this society and that it is 166 square miles, and that what is it in every report that is written on Barbados, what is the first thing that they say about Barbados? Social capital, trust, social partnership, you belong to it? What's the position of the labor movement on this? The Chicago Police Department has, we were just discussing before coming in here, 40,000 police. And they're refusing to. And they said they're going to mandate them. What do you think is going to happen? Go and mandate the QEH now and tell me what's going to happen tomorrow morning at the QEH in the midst of a surge. There's some things that are best left unsaid. And there's some things that are best understood by appreciating the context within which we are operating and the people. But having said that, I ask you, why are you a half-empty man? Because if you were a half-full man, you would tell me that the glass is more than half full. And we would focus on the fact that we need to be celebrating the reality that Barbados has managed to secure a higher percentage of vaccinated persons than almost any other country that is an independent country in the Caribbean. Now, is that where we want to be? No. But we are getting to where we need to be. And one thing I've learned about a small nation such as this is that's why, what's it called, Cahill? The plasma gasification could never work. There's certain things that we can't do as a small nation because of something called wipeout risk. There's certain things we can't do as a small nation because of a lack of capacity for enforcement. And those of you who don't have the obligation that I have across the board, therefore, may find it easy to say, why not do this and why not do that? And I'm creating the opportunities for safe zones, recognizing that where people work, they ought to have a choice between that and regular testing. Now, having said that, who is the first body out there begging them to vaccinate? It's me. But there's a difference between losing your job because you refuse to be vaccinated and being encouraged to be vaccinated. And that is the delicate balance that this country has to maintain. In spite of the fact that we have not mandated it, we have now 64.6%. Last time I checked, that's as close to 2 in every 3 persons who can make a decision, have taken the decision. Now, we've said that we want to get, and if we get to probably 75% of that eligible population, that we can start to see many of the restrictions go. But we're at 64.6%. And then when we get even to the last threshold, we now know that we're going to have to learn to live with it. I can only say to people that if you can take a vaccine, please take it. Because whether it is this society or the global economy, we all know that there is going to be no serious recovery until people take the vaccinations. But when they finish taking the vaccinations or they don't, you still need a society and a country to live in. And if you have expended all the capital that you have in this one mission, what you got left to do anything else? Now call me concerned and responsible for maintaining the essence of this society. You may think that I shouldn't be doing that and I should play a short-term game. And the short-term game is pass a law and vaccinate everybody. What you're going to have after. And when they decide they ain't coming to work, what you're going to do. This country needs to work hard to get everybody on the same page. And we've done a marvelous job so far in getting 2 out of every 3 eligible people. But we have to go a little further because 2 out of 3 is not enough. We don't want to stop out of 3 out of 4, but that's really at the least where we need to go, 75% minimum. Now, I know Bajans as well too. And I think that more and more Barbadians are appreciating what is at stake in terms of their own personal life, first and foremost. And how can you have more than half of the world's population, 3.5 billion people, be vaccinated and no serious, nothing that happened to nobody really. There have been a few people, regrettably, but the by far overwhelming majority have not had negative effects from the vaccination. And we will wait and see what happens for the ones under 12, but that is as critical because regrettably, they still can catch it and they still can spread it. So mandating vaccines for adults while the children run about in the house unvaccinated, causing the adult to lose their job and not be able to buy food for the house, doesn't quite add up for me or the government. Thanks.
I think Sanjay, you want to come up?
Please.
Yeah.
Microphone probably, Sanjay.
Prime Minister. I think this is a subject that's close to your heart to do with planning. We recently had a client coming from the UK. They have the land, wanting to invest £10 million in manufacturing here. And they went to the designers, and the designers said it's going to take them 12 months plus for planning. And I said, no way, it's 3 to 6 months. And I'm telling you that, etc., providing you meet all the conditions that, that you're supposed to. So did I advise my client correctly?
I think you know you did, Sanjay. But look, the bottom line is that the government is moving to be able to facilitate as much as we can. As I said, is it perfect? No, it isn't. Because in the middle, there are all kinds of obstacles that keep going. And as I said, small states know that they can do well when things are good. When things are difficult, it's the same people doing everything. But what we've learned to do is to identify the opportunities and to literally move on them. I should say, and Minister Simmons is here, we were very unhappy with the length of time it was taken with the renewable energy projects. We have literally deconstructed the process, and a paper came, it went back, and it's coming back again, that will see us reduce that process from 12 months plus to 3 to 6 months. 3 months if there's no major issues, 6 months otherwise. And what we're effectively doing is taking the 3 separate processes that affect the approval of a renewable energy investment, the ministry with its license, the Light and Power with the power purchase agreement, and town planning. Once they get the first 2, then and give you that, then the town planning will probably move. We've also taken a decision to hire 5 more people within that department of the town planning temporarily in order to be able to deal with the backlog, most of which really has come more from the business interruption that COVID has put on us than anything else. So we anticipate that we will not need all 5 of them in the long term, but that we probably will need another 2 officers who will just focus on this going forward. And let's try and get things going. You have a manufacturing plant, that's why the man standing at the mic now came after you, because he wants to know who it is.
Absolutely.
Mr. Hill,
Absolutely.
welcome, sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon, PM. One of the main points I would like to raise, not just to the government but to the private sector, is that we're in crisis. I'm saying, look at SOS to exporters. In 2000, we had 248 exporters participating in our certification program. Today, that number is down to 105. And based on the projections that we have, by 2030, we will only have 38 export businesses in Barbados. We have a serious problem. And what is following that trend is also a decline in the amount of foreign exchange that we are generating through exports. So what we've seen is that there have been a significant increase in small businesses and other businesses, but there is nothing to do with COVID. From 2000 right through to now, a consistent 5% decline in exports taking place within the island. So PM, we need a rescue plan for export businesses urgently. And what are the interventions on the private sector side to get these export numbers back up in the air?
I spoke earlier, Mark, about the Green Bank. The truth is that I'm always conscious of speaking too long at things like this. And there's so much more that I could have said. Dr. Greenidge and others have been working to unlock the funds, and I made the point that the government is going to have to play a role to help bridge the private sector, just as we did with the BEST program, and we put funds there in order to be able to help you keep your heads above water. We're going to have to do it with the industrial sector too. There is about $75 million there, and we may have to top it up a bit, but we need to make it work for the private sector players who have serious plans that can allow us, one, to go into life science. How does Barbados not have a HACCP compliant food industry lab or manufacturing entity? It is almost ridiculous. And at the same time, therefore, that we are going to work with the garment industry, fashion industry, to be able to retool and repurpose and do clusters, we need to do the same thing with the food. We need to do the same thing with the furniture. We need to make sure that the tourism sector also, with all of this investment that is intended to come, that there's a percentage reserved for local. In the same way with the garments, we've also, as part of the compact, given them the assurance that we will deal with the public sector uniforms, but you've got to make sure that you meet us also on issues of quality and timeliness and affordability. And if we can do those things together, believe you me, the Housing Credit Fund, we are going to use that to help us literally create the silent revolution in housing that is absolutely necessary. And where does that come in? Renewable energy has come about to give us a lifeline to agriculture and to give us a lifeline to housing, so that people who hitherto the banks would not even look at as being worthy of a mortgage. And you asked about fair reporting legislation. I'm sure the Attorney General heard you. We've been talking about that, as well as unfair contract terms legislation too. But the truth is that the handful of draftsmen that we have are being pulled all the time to do other things that are critical for us to get through this crisis. But getting back to the point, those funds that we have, we are trying to unlock. The last government used a lot of it to hold government securities and paper. I'm saying I don't want that. And what we need to be able to do is that if the appetite is there on the part of the private sector, and we can use those funds to literally leverage more with or without the private commercial banking sector, then we'll do it. But it is absolutely critical in order for us to have a stronger private sector. I got to share one thing with you that I noticed before coming on stage. Look at who's sponsored this event. Call them off. Look at them behind me. Which firm is a Bajan firm now? One. TMR. Which used to be a Bajan firm?
Massey.
Sagicor used to be what? Barbados Mutual. Massey Distribution and merged with who? Barbados Shipping and Trading. Republic Bank took over what? Barbados National Bank. Now the difference between me and others is that I don't necessarily have a problem fully with it. if we are prepared to be active and controlling in a larger entity. But it comes down to the mind and the mental approach. I am not problem with Trinidad coming in here. I have a problem with Barbadians not going into Trinidad. And that is what I mean about having owners of capital at the table. I have no problem with NCB Capital Markets coming here from Jamaica, but I have a problem with us not going into Jamaica more aggressively. And the reality is that Barbados has the unique opportunity of leading the CARICOM single market and economy at a governmental level. But what we are not seeing is the hunger or the appetite for expansion and the culture of contentment that informed our behavior prior to COVID and prior to these things has to change. And I look forward, and that's why I'm glad to see people like Edwin, you're here with the manufacturing still, but we have to be able to see greater aggression on the part of our local private sector if we are going to survive these times. At the same time, we need to make ourselves attractive to those people who can bring capital here, who want to do research, who want to go into life sciences, who want to do the blue economy stuff. We haven't even started to touch the thing on blue economy. And that's why I said that, look, I was conscious that the majority of you are still in the traditional economy. But the truth is that we need to be talking about the new knowledge economy and hub. We need to be talking about expanding medical and educational services. We need to be talking about expanding opportunities in the blue economy, including deep sea mining and other things that hitherto we would never even have contemplated. And we need to take control of the opportunities that exist along with other Caribbean private sector people to solve the problem of logistics in the region, in particular the Sea Bridge, especially if food and nutritional security has to come from within this region now. How are you going to transport it? Who is getting involved in that? How can we use the same Green Climate Fund to help us de-risk and make more affordable the acquisition of a fast ferry that can move 40-foot containers between Trinidad, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Grenada when the day comes? Now you could imagine moving 40-foot containers, including refrigerated ones, on a daily basis in this region. What happens now to your opportunities for business, Mr. Brankin?
Tremendous work. Senator Wiggins.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Following on from what you said in relation to the Broke Pond agreement that you've worked so hard on, I just wanted to make an announcement that we are bringing a delegation from Suriname next month, in the middle of next month, to meet with the private sector, the chamber. I have to meet with Misha tomorrow to discuss it. And of course, Mark Hill and I, we are always talking. So I just wanted to let everyone here know well in advance, and I'll be getting around to the various stakeholders in the room and others to let them know a big delegation is coming in from Suriname.
Thank you. I also want to remind us, Mrs. Tanis, you were there, Mr. Branca, you were there, with respect to the opportunities for Guyana. I hope I can lead a delegation of you guys into Guyana, either later this year or early into the new year, probably early in the new year at some point. But I know that I already sent Minister Duguid and others down there last weekend, and Mr. Hill, in order to be able to look at opportunities from a perspective of where we can now talk to the local private sector and see how we can bridge them. We also have a responsibility to recognize that construction has always been that sector that has stimulated economic activity in this country, particularly retail and other things. Once people are working, then they're going to spend. Now, regrettably, we need to also talk to people and tell them that because of the environment within which we're working, you can spend some, but you also got to save some for a rainy day too, because our circumstances have changed as a nation and as a world. And therefore, I look forward to having that discussion with some of you. But thank you. Let me also say, lack of time again, I want to commend the Minister of Tourism, Lisa Cummins, for ensuring that we can have 2 new airlines brought into this country in the middle of a pandemic. You know, we take things for granted, you know. To have KLM fly here and to have Aer Lingus fly here in the middle of a pandemic. In fact, because I have to go to Brussels next week, we were trying to look at some things. The flights are doing well. And I want to address this issue of the CEO of the BTMI, who I believe is arriving in the country today. I want us to give him a warm welcome. And why? When we came to this point a few months ago, I indicated to the country, I didn't hide, I indicated to the country that Barbados was going to do a global search because we could not afford anything other than the very best to lead our tourism sector in the middle of a crisis. This government stands by that decision. The extent to which we hope we will be able to build capacity is a different matter. And we certainly are intent on doing so, and you can hear that in everything else that we've said today. But we have to recognize now that what is needed is not only somebody who has capacity, but somebody who has network too. Because who will get the doors opened quicker for you now in the middle of a crisis when everybody is asking for a door to be opened? It's the people who know people and who can leverage that. At the same time, we have to think outside of the box. And the fact that the gentleman who has been appointed has worked in Canada, has worked in Asia, has worked across multiple areas, that is exactly what we need in this country now. And since when do we, who export more people to the world in the last 150 years than most in this region, now have a problem with people coming here? That cannot be the Barbados that the opposition wants us to build. And if they ask me to pause for a moment and address politics, I can give them a lot of examples where they did not put Barbados first.
Just wanted to entertain
Or
some...
pigeons.
Wanted to entertain some of the questions from our online audience. So we had a question, someone asking when are events going to be allowed for vaccinated persons?
I hope soon. You heard me talk about the shortage of draftsmen. I feel for my Attorney General and for his Department of Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and let me publicly, AG, commend them, because I don't think people realize the extent to which in a pandemic, the continuous drafting of directives, etc. And I'm now seeing the CMO. I don't know how come I didn't see you before, my brother. Thank you, and let me commend you and the doctors and the nurses who continue to carry the battle. Bottom line is that the one for the healthcare institutions, I believe, AG, that draft is in good hand. And I may well ask them to, and the Minister of Health, to defer it for another week, because I believe that the CMO has to bring in all of the owners of the private nursing homes and the various other people who run private health facilities. Because this is not just a case of passing a directive. We need to talk through with people and make sure that people understand what is happening. We wanted to do health first for obvious reasons. Thereafter, we go now, after we finish them, we go to the other frontline workers, the police, the prison officers, soldiers, customs, immigration, etc., and the tourism and hospitality workers. I would like to believe that we will have directives that make and require either vaccine or testing for all of those entities between the beginning of November and the middle of November. On a parallel track, we think that we can probably get the private events drafted as well, so that from the middle of November, we hopefully should be somewhere there or thereabouts for private events. But a lot depends also on the guidance from the CMO and others, because once the vaccinated numbers continue, and we saw it when we go to places like New York and elsewhere, you see people moving about. And why? Because of the high vaccination rates, or the activities where people say they want vaccinated people. Now, there's some people who say, I must intervene, the government must intervene to stop private people from saying who they want at private functions. The government is not going to do that. And in the same way we have defended the right of persons not to be the victim of a mandatory vaccination policy, equally, we're not going to stop people who want in their private events to be able to have people who are vaccinated only. We also recognize that there are some public events for which that level of protection is what people would like. And that's the direction that we're going in. So we hope that they can start that soon. The rapid testing, in a funny way, Delta admits of rapid testing being more effective than the classic PCR. And that has been the real game changer for us, because it means that also that people who do want to test, if you want to test people to come into a restaurant before they come, that you can do that and get an answer that is reasonably reliable within a few minutes, 15 minutes at most, and that the cost of that test can be put on. We have said as a government, we will continue to cover the testing for public facilities, but if you choose to get tested in a restaurant, that's a matter for you. If you choose to get tested at a private event, entertainment event, that's a matter for you. The other reason why we're holding to the middle of November, Mr. Chapman is somewhere there, he too, his people are under pressure, and they need to be able to get through with the CMO, these other institutions, and then we come to the people who are dealing with events. So hold strain for us until about the middle of November. I'm not giving you a set date, because I'm not going to do that to them, because I know many of them ain't getting much sleep at all.
Prime Minister, clearly the ease of doing business has a direct relation to the cost of doing business. What can we look forward to in terms of the ease of doing business?
You asking Mr. Sambrano or me?
You, Prime Minister.
No, you can be asking me, because it's his company that does the contract for Kaipo.
One contract.
But that
All right,
is the contract.
let me be specific.
No, this is the point I'm making. No, this is the point I'm making. That I hear this from you as a mantra. Not you personally, but from people as a mantra. As if progress is not being made. The bottom line is that BDO is responsible for the Ministry of International Business doing theirs. EY is responsible for Kaipo. Okay? Whether we like it or not, you're the first ones going to tell me that your partners in India have told you that they can't do X, Y, Z before ABC. So that having allowed so much time to elapse before action was taken, this government has been systematically going after all of the items for deconstruction and reconstruction with respect to either technology, legislation, or administrative processes. Can we do it all at once? No. We recognize renewable energy applications taking too long. Deconstruct and reconstruct. So it's a work in progress. I was perhaps a little unfair to
you were a little unfair to me, because let me be.
I was about not to you. I was saying to Chris.
Because
if you want,
let me look at.
If you want to go,
Asikuda World has been a successful launch.
Yeah.
But we have not yet had the full benefits of Asikuda World. There are a number of government agencies that must feed into Asikuda World to make it what it can be.
And believe you me, what have we been going through for the last 21 months? How many of those government agencies have been able to work a full week?
All of them.
That's not true.
All of them.
That's not true. What has happened is that they have had skeletal services to meet skeletal demand. And that's my point. That effectively from March last year to just maybe what? It's only a month ago, Anton, that we start talking 6 weeks ago about a marathon and getting people to change their mindset about the fact that you have to work through and push through COVID. The reality is that there is no company or agency that has worked 100% in this country between March 2020 and 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago. And therefore, things that should have been completed by now are taking longer, largely because we have not the capacity that others have with respect to fighting all of these things. Let me put it in context. No, in truth. Because I think that we have forgotten. No, but I think we've forgotten that in this year, all of us wanted 2021 to come. We could not wait for 2020 to be over. Why? Why? Because 2020 was the worst thing that we could have contemplated when it happened. But when 2020 was done, we didn't know that we still had before us the worst ashfall in 119 years. And we are still suffering from the impact of it on a lot of equipment that we're finding that the dust has affected. We didn't know that we would have the worst hurricane in 66 years. And we certainly did not expect to continue with the pandemic in Delta, because if all we had to deal with was Alpha, we would be sailing all like now. And what we don't know is what potentially lies ahead of us. So all I'm saying to you is that, look, I hear you. The others will tell you that perhaps I am more querulous than you think with the cabinet, than perhaps I should be, because I'm anxious. And I'm anxious for my country. And we're anxious for our country because we know that we can do better. We're doing better than most, but we know we can do better. Are we where we want to be? No, Anthony. So I'm telling you that, look, those government departments that are not fully there, the AG would tell you the Customs Department right now is in the middle of negotiations with the labor unions over the right to be able to protect national security in the ports of entry. And that in and of itself is a major discussion. So that while you deal with competitiveness issues, we're still dealing with revenue issues. This government has lost last year $600 million in revenue, almost 32% of our revenue. But we still have, and this year we challenge, the same departments dealing with revenue. And then the same Customs Department, Customs, National Security, competitiveness, and revenue. And all I'm saying is that this crisis has made it challenging. The destination is still there for us, but I also want us sometimes to recognize that we need to be a little more empathetic and cooperative in building. And that's why I say that if you see things not being done, don't ask why they're not being done. Come and ask, how can I help to get it done?
Right. So on that note, right, we have a lot of capital lining up, queuing up for renewable energy. Yeah. The villa sales, we have some investors doing very well there. We think that the welcome stamp actually was a great innovation. I mean, despite, I guess, visitors plummeted to 1/10, villa sales actually got stronger. So we believe, obviously, a lot of high net worth individuals are looking at Barbados as a remote working destination, and is generating a lot of positive activity there. We're also seeing investors looking at things like health, health tourism. There's, we are seeing a lot of activity from where we sit, but how can we work together then to unlock all this capital to get them into the country and keep them here?
By changing your mindset, Chris, because everything you said depends only on external capital coming in. Everything I said today is about changing the mindset.
Not all of this capital is external capital.
Well, fair enough. But I'm saying to you that changing the mindset as to how we utilize our capital here and where we export it and where we find new opportunities for business here to export the services or goods from that. And you ask me how you're going to help. I tell you that's where we need the help. That's the big gap in the Barbados economy now. That's what Mark Hill just got up and said. That how does a country move from $500 million in exports to less than $300 million in exports? How do 248 companies end up being less than, how much it is now, 100 and how much? 105? That's where you can help. And that's why I said that the first change is mental.
Just to come back again, I mean, that capital wants to get into areas that will export services. If we're talking about medical, it's not for medical purposes, just for
agreed, and I take that as a given. So if those people are coming,
and renewable energy will save us a lot of money.
and we've said
Right.
we've reconstructed and the fossil
Yeah.
fuel free, and we have the targets for 2030. But you ask me, how can the private sector
How
help?
can we work together?
That's
to
what I'm
unlock
telling
it?
you.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that the country needs that additional platform for resilience and self-sufficiency and exports, because without that, you can't stabilize what you say is coming now. The bottom line is that unless we can reduce unemployment in this country, how are you going to deal with social stability?
Right.
Full stop. So how are you going to create the jobs beyond construction? How are you going to create the foreign exchange beyond that which we earn? You have to earn it. Beyond that which we borrow, and beyond which we get from tourism. Because if ever we knew that we needed to diversify, the last 21 months has told us that even though tourism is our business, it cannot be our only business, which is effectively what it is. So I'm saying to you that, honestly, we have to have a greater appetite for risk and a greater appetite for the exporting of goods and services and a greater appetite for the sharing of investments. And what do I mean? There are still too many companies locally that are not prepared to open up and to accept equity investment from others. And the fundamental gap that is missing is trust. I've asked Minister Simmons to launch a program on financial literacy. It was part of our manifesto. We have a lot of money collectively. We don't individually. And therefore, when I say to you that the first thing is a change in mindset, I mean it. Because the average Barbadian is going to want to be the owner of 100% of something, even if it is nothing, rather than being a 50% owner of something great. That has to change. And that's why I said, unlike the rest, I'm not necessarily condemning that, because Sagicor is a much bigger entity than Barbados Mutual could ever have been at that point in time, because the capital needed to expand it both in terms of human resources and financial were not there. But if they didn't have the mindset to do it, it couldn't happen. By the same token, I don't want to hear, when we establish a green bank, that we can't get in Trinidad. Because a green bank, Trinidad got green projects too. So we should be equally competing down there rather than worrying about Republic Bank being up here alone. So I genuinely mean that there has to be a change in mindset. And then, as I said, mindset drives action, and action drives cooperation. And I genuinely mean that.
Okay. I got you.
And you know why?
Why?
Because we'll be changing 3 centuries of behavior. And if we are honest, we know that.
I have another question, but I think you've already answered it, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is online again.
Chris, sorry, if I might interject. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. And it's on that point, because it's been in my head as I was sitting there. When you talked about adaptation, and you talked about evolving as a people, because mindset is one thing to say, yeah, we have to change our mindset, but what's your thought around how do you actually make it happen?
Yeah.
Because obviously it starts from how we educate our children. It starts from how the next generation sees the world and realizes that this is just a stepping stone to the rest of it. But what are your thoughts around that?
Through partnership. Let's take the same garment industry, or choose any other one for that matter. We have money sitting down doing nothing. I sure the IDC got more money in a bank account. It can't help me in a bank account. I need it outside. Okay? We need to therefore help bridge the enterprises that are willing to go into these new areas by making available to them capital that is affordable and in a more easy way than you would have had from the commercial banks, who seem to be more interested in earning fees rather than lending, as we said. So that's the first thing. But if you don't have the mindset and the will to do it, I have nobody to facilitate. And that's what I mean, that is the first step. The second step is executing your plan. Access to financial resources. If legislative environment needs to change, we discuss that, as has happened in so many other areas. If we need to infuse technology, because that is the world in which we live in, we will facilitate and do it. And hopefully we can get it done quicker, because once we have a certain level of digital activity, hopefully it will not take as long as it has taken moving from book and paper and analog to digital as it is taken now. So I genuinely feel that we are in the ballpark, but what we need now is strategic focus and commitment to a long game. And that's why I said at the end of the day, things are not going to happen overnight. And the people who feel that because after a year or two you ain't seeing a profit and you're done, then you're in the wrong business. Because you know that sometimes you have to plow back money into businesses in order to stabilize it, especially in a difficult business environment such as this. So the government, short answer, the government is ready to partner with those who are ready to do things. And I mean that genuinely. And there are too many funds sitting down. I've told them we have to find a way of making sure that they're not holding government paper anymore. And we've done that by enjoying having the international community have the confidence in what we are doing, such that the various policy-based loans and assistance also from the IMF is there, that we don't need to keep that money in government securities, and we can now utilize it as an enabling framework for the Barbadian private sector to develop products locally and for export and services as well. Does that help you, Lisa?
Yes.
Tell me the wider part. No problem. And we haven't even talked about new areas such as fintech. I leave here to go into a conversation with a major international player on fintech. And all I'm saying is that I'm not starting there, because the judgment of the government first and foremost is that we have to change what we're doing first. And then those other things can come in, believe you me.
Prime Minister, I had a question around the whole issue of global warming. And as you come away from COP26, how do we get the average Barbadian mindset to change to say, listen, we are in doo-doo? How do we get the average Barbadian mindset to move away? How do we get the average Barbadian to understand that we have to adapt and make serious changes in our physical, even in terms of our physical, where we are physically?
By doing what has become uncomfortable for me, but which is absolutely critical. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Yeah. You know, when Arthur once told me that politics is the art of repetition, and the truth is that if you're going to get people to change behavior, you have to repeat it over and over and over in the hope that they're also going to change habits. So I'm sure that the members of Cabinet have heard me talk about the saltwater intrusion in aquifers and the coastal erosion and the thing, and they hear me saying it over and over, because we're not yet at the point where people are appreciating the extent to which this climate change is just, climate crisis is just a fancy set of words. But you see that rain that falling almost now with too much regularity on an afternoon, and you get that short, sharp showers. That is the climate crisis. You see the fact that you can't go and find no cobblers on the west coast, on the reefs, that is the climate crisis. You see the fact that every time water comes down from Bushall and down into Murphy Pasture, and they can water, and we can name all the areas where the flooding has taken place, that is the climate crisis. Okay? And what has to change is people's behavior from water conservation right back through to food and nutritional security. When I planted the tree this morning, I made the point, every Bajan needs to have a lime tree, a breadfruit tree, some other kind of fruit tree, at least 4 or 5 trees in your yard. When we were kids growing up, and our grandparents and great-grandparents had trees and stock. Not true? And then even in small areas would grow provisions. And I'm not telling you that I'm asking you to go back, but let's be real. When we lost almost $2 billion in economic activity last year, that's what an 18% economic decline is. We've gone back to the same output figures in nominal terms as 2006, when last we were in government. And in real terms, guess where we've gone back to? 1994. when Ronald Topham and I first went into government. So that what this country has endured, not us alone, all of the tourism and travel dependent economies who have all declined by double-digit numbers, and quite frankly, Barbados is among the lowest of the declines. Okay? So I want us to appreciate that a cataclysmic event has happened. It is nothing that happens regularly. But if we don't learn from it and change our behavior and change our actions, then we shall become a victim of it. But if we choose to claim our destiny and to frame it out and to work in partnership, I know that the local private sector does not have access to capital on its own. Therefore, the government has to be able itself, one, to enable, and two, to find instruments where the average Barbadian who individually may not have a lot, but who collectively have enough, can be able to utilize some of that capital along with what we unlock as a government, along then with the genuine financial intermediaries if they're interested, in order to spend the money that has to be spent to adapt. Because if we don't adapt, we will be victims. And that's why we've set the horizon of a decade in order for us to do all of the things. Why? Because we know it's not going to be perfect. But if we can do most of that, if we start to change out our vehicles to get to 2030 in terms of non-fossil fuel vehicles, and if we start to get the renewable energy going, not just with the large plants, but with the housing as well, then I believe that we have an opportunity to get there. Is possible.
Prime Minister, we have been inundated with cries from the duty-free sector. I mentioned it in my remarks.
I heard you, and I deliberately didn't answer. But the truth is that we are looking at it. And why? You're asking us, the government, to carry everybody still. But you're asking us to forego more and more revenue at a time when the revenue has already had a 33%.
I'm just asking for a window of breathing space, as you refer to it. Breathing space.
And that's why I said that we are going to have the discussion with you.
Thank you.
You understand? So that we understand and appreciate, but we equally have to balance it with our realities. And whether we like it or not, there has been some marginal improvement in revenue on last year, but we're still down from 2019. And that's really the balance that we think. At the same time, there are those among you who would want us to look at fuel prices. We want to look at that. But you can't look at everything and expect to still hold the center. So that's why I said that the conversations will be had with you once we are satisfied that we're in a position now to get activity going again. And we think that from November you're going to see more and more activity coming. It's difficult because we're in the middle of a surge still, and regrettably, there are some people who are dying. Our death rates are much less than others, but one death is way too many. And if you, like me, get that notice every time it happens, then you understand why my heart is perhaps in the way in which it is today, because I don't want to stop getting it either, because I must never forget what the people of this nation are going through every day. But at the same time, we've been around long enough to know that we have to get on with living. And if we don't get on with living, then
what will we have left?
Circumstances will take care of us, regrettably.
One question from online. Safe zones, private enterprises. Is there a timeline for documented procedures and implementation?
Well, we're hoping in the directives that we'll be able to set that out. As I said, the first one, we want to be able to have them meet. That one is absolutely urgent. And that's why for the tourism one, we've said probably not before the middle of the month, because we need to make sure that persons can meet. I'm conscious that a lot of the tourism people are going to be away, and that makes it a little more complex with the world travel market and the other things that they're doing to be able to drum up the business. So I don't want to give a firm timeline, knowing that a lot of them are leaving this weekend to start that trek for drumming up business. But we do believe that we can get and make serious progress with the healthcare sector and with the other frontline workers immediately. And if we start tourism by the middle, then it's more a question of how long it will take them to start testing their people. And some of them are already doing it. So I don't see it as much of an issue as others, because I know that quite a few of them are already testing.
Okay.
But I have to leave soon. But the key is this, you know. My experience with Barbadians, and the cabinet has reinforced it in some instances, you have to talk with people in small groups. You cannot talk down to Barbadians. And that's perhaps the biggest lesson that all of us must learn with respect to dealing with people, especially people who are employees. And if you have the kind of cultural and historical profile that we do, you cannot see past people. You cannot talk down. In fact, why I'm so clear on it is that this is the argument I use for the country as a small state internationally. So that I am appealing to you to ask your members, in the absence of a mandatory vaccination policy for work, that we need to do the talking and the small talking in the small groups, and that is what the government is prepared to work with you hand in hand to join those conversations. For schools, different story. Made that very, very clear. And Santia, you know fully that children are already accustomed to being vaccinated for schools, unless they have an exemption from the CMO for religious or health reasons. And with respect to entertainment, I've already said it many times, that the private sector is free to determine the basis upon which people will access their entertainment functions. But for earning a living and jobs where people got to eat and pay rent and pay mortgage, vaccine or test, please.
Okay. More questions?
That's it.
I think so.
Well, I think we're cognizant of your time.
Yeah.
No, and thank you.
Yeah, Chris. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm going to invite Jimmy to come up and give the closing remarks then. So thank you very much, Prime Minister, for taking this time. All right.
Thank you. And I hope that the next time I'm going to ask that you be my host again.
Oh, boy.
Because on that occasion, we will be able jointly to report progress. Mission accomplished.
Okay.
With respect to corporate affairs.
No problem.
But I know that you all don't mind that, because you tell me you perform.
We want to perform.